think about all the resources that you've got and what your true core offering is. Are there some features that don't serve your mission as a company? But there may be other features that are just not getting you as a business the value and are not giving value to your customers as well.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Hello, welcome. We are back with somebody that I met in person in Lisbon in October at the Productize conference. And now we are back to do a full episode, albeit remote, unfortunately. We are joined by Magali Pelissier. And Magali is well thought of for her work she does on deprecation and the fact that there are features in many products that we hate and then maybe they shouldn't hang around. And that's going to be the topic of our first episode that we were recording today. Magali Pelissier is a senior product executive with a proven track record of improving the bottom line of over 10 products. With a background in aeronautical engineering and economics, she started her career in analytics before transitioning to technology and discovering her passion for product management. She takes a holistic approach to her entire customer experience and has been recognized for her ability to bridge the gap between people, process, and technology. Magali is a creator and host of Product Perspectives, an excellent podcast that you should all listen to, where she invites stakeholders to discuss how to collaborate more effectively with product managers. As a former elite artistic swimmer, a sentence I never thought I would say on this podcast, and channel swimmer, she embodies the values of teamwork, accountability and diversity, equity and inclusion. And with that awesome introduction done, Magali, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. It only seems like yesterday that we were in Lisbon together, and now here we find ourselves recording this episode on a rather blue sky January day. Magali, was that introduction okay for you?
It was perfect. Yeah, I couldn't have done it better.
I worked hard to memorize that.
I can tell. I think you're good. You've been doing podcasting for a while.
Yeah, we have been doing this for a while. I think we're coming up to, oh, blimey, it might even be like coming up to 3 years this year. I'm not sure. But it's nice. We've done really well. Last year, when looking back at all the stats, some of our episodes were in the top 25% globally on our podcasting platform, which was really lovely to hear. It's nice to know that you're getting people listening. And I think it's because we have awesome guests like you talking about really interesting topics.
Deprecation. No, nothing. Deprecation.
Deprecation, yes. Deprecation, not depreciation, but deprecation. And how endings can fuel future success. Now, this reminds me of a couple of things. There was an episode I did with a gentleman named Cliff Hazel where we spoke about the power of quitting and actually how we're always taught not to quit and not to give up on things and to stick with it. You know, winners don't quit. Actually, sometimes consolidating your losses, learning from that and moving forward is one of the best things that we can do. Having conversations with this with my children over Christmas as well about the power of just saying, do you know what? It's time that I stop doing this thing because my energy is better spent somewhere else. Let me consolidate my learnings and then let's move forward and do something different with our time. And I think this is something as product managers, as coaches, I think we see it all too often where people really want to stick to the thing because it was their little baby and they've invested lots of time in it and they've tried to see it grow and maybe it's not working out and maybe it shouldn't be around. So with that in mind, yeah, Magali, I'm assuming you are an avid user of software products. Is there any particular feature of any product that you think should be deprecated?
Yes, I think there's loads. I'm not going to use examples like Excel and Jira, but we know people have a love-hate relationship with this software. Yeah. But I'm going to use LinkedIn because, as you know, being a podcaster, we have to advertise and communicate about our podcast. So we have to kind of play the LinkedIn game. But what we see is that LinkedIn is adding lots of features that are creating a lot of noise. And one of the most notable ones is the one where you can contribute to AI articles, and they've got hundreds and thousands of people contributing. And the more you contribute, then the more they increase your score. I don't exactly know how the algorithm works. And at the end, you get that kind of like top voice badge on your profile. I just find that it's creating a lot of noise. I don't really see a lot of value. I would like to see how many people actually read those articles, as opposed to just seeing something in their feed about it. I don't think it's adding a lot of value, and it's creating a lot of noise actually around who is someone to follow on LinkedIn, who has good content, and who is here just to elevate their brand. So I would question that. I'm not saying, if there are people from LinkedIn listening, I'm not saying I know your business better than you. I understand the intention, but it's obviously working very well because a lot of people are talking about this feature. But is it really driving the right behavior?
It's interesting, isn't it? There's so many top product management voices and top agile voices and top voices. It's a very easy badge to earn. I think I got an email forwarded to me which said that by simply replying to 5 of these articles will make you a top voice. And, writing 5 responses to some very poorly worded AI-generated questions is not really going to make you a top voice. It just means you've got maybe a bit too much spare time on your hands. But the one thing we don't know is, what's the hypotheses for LinkedIn for this particular feature? What are they trying to prove or disprove? Because maybe actually the fact they're annoying a lot of people who are in various industries, maybe they are willing to accept that. And so that's the one thing we as users find it hard to understand sometimes, is that there are features that perhaps are there that we don't feel should be there, but maybe it's fulfilling the objective of the organization, but at the same time, annoying maybe, Magali, what we would kind of class ourselves as a loyal user base. But then what's the alternative to LinkedIn? It's not we're going to jump ship, is it, at the moment?
Yeah, I've tried it. I left LinkedIn, it was probably a couple of years ago now, and I tried to find some alternatives, and I had to go back because there is no alternative at the moment.
There isn't any alternative. But I'm not a huge fan of that particular endeavor of LinkedIn. I mean, I find with LinkedIn that there's just some stuff in there I just wish was a bit easier. But the interesting thing is, I think that if we look at LinkedIn compared to perhaps a startup, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Mag, from an order of magnitude of how important it is to deprecate features, would you say it's more or less important for startups versus well-established products such as LinkedIn?
That's a good question. I don't know if there is a rule, but what I can say is it's definitely a different exercise. With LinkedIn as well, they've got a B2C and a B2B side, right? So they probably have to treat those aspects differently. And there are links between the two, because if you deprecate something that's meant for B2C that people use, for example, as influencers, it also may have an impact on the revenue from campaigns and marketing that affects the B2B side. So I would say certainly LinkedIn has to be more cautious in their approach, and they have to take into account the differences between consumers and enterprise and companies in general. For a startup, I think it's a matter of survival. The more features you have, the more you have to maintain, the more you have to support your customers. I was actually talking for my own podcast to someone in customer support who said, if you put all those features out there as a PM, sometimes you forget about them. They're not working. You're like, you don't want to admit your features aren't working. So you leave them there hoping nobody's going to notice. But guess who notices? The users, because they see the interface is cluttered, but also your customer support teams, because there's always a user who's going to use it and who's going to get stuck, and you're not maintaining it and you haven't put much more thought into it. So somebody's going to feel the pain. So I would say for a startup, it's probably a matter of survival and also product market fit to get rid of what can clutter the experience.
When I went through your introduction and you say you'd like to take a holistic approach, I think there will be talk about the deprecation of features. It is a much more holistic, systemic mindset required, because I think if you are in a startup, talking from my own position here, that actually every decision you're making as to what you think you should put out, there is a cost to that. There's a cost to maintain it. There's a cost that when you touch something else, perhaps it will have an impact on that thing. Then people start using it and then they don't like it. It doesn't work as they expect. So they need to support it, and then you get support tickets. And then all of this costs money. And if you haven't got a lot of money, how much of it do you want to be spending trying to support stuff that maybe perhaps could be taken out? Now, I can imagine that actually kind of pitching that to certain tech-savvy startup people or smaller companies could be quite easy. But Magali, if you found yourself in an elevator with somebody that got a company, small to medium-sized software product, and they don't really get this whole, how endings fuel future success. They're not particularly tech savvy. They don't really understand this kind of holistic nature and the further impacts of keeping things in, which perhaps could be taken out. If you're starting at floor number 1 and you're going to end up on floor number 26, right? What's your elevator pitch for the deprecation of features?
Oh, that's tough. It feels like an interview. I should have prepared this one. Okay, so I would say, first of all, okay, I only have time to think because I wanted to ask them, okay, what is the feature that costs you the most money? In terms of support, what is the feature that people don't understand? What is the feature that nobody talks about? I would want to ask those questions. Obviously, if I'm an innovator, I don't have time to ask all those questions. So I would say, think about all the resources that you've got and what your true core offering is. Are there some features that don't serve your mission as a company? And amongst those features, which you've built, because we know it happens because a certain customer or a certain contract, and you had to do that, right? But there may be other features that, are just not getting you as a business the value you wanted from them and are not giving value to your customers as well. Try and discuss with your teams internally how much that is costing you to support and maintain those features.
It's a great point. So is having a clear, and I kind of dislike this word, so you can replace it with something else, but having a clear vision as to who you're serving, is that important when we're talking about deprecation of features?
I think so, because especially at all stages of a company, you can try and do something, right? Product management is all about experimentation, trying things out. And sometimes you try something and it doesn't work, and that's okay. And I think in product, even though we have some thought leaders who advocate for experimentation, in practice, it's still really hard to recognize that something we launched didn't work. But we should be more open to that.
I was away for Christmas and we had a long plane journey. So I read cover to cover rather than kind of dipping in Radical Dutt's book on radical product thinking.
Yes.
And for me, it was a big, I liked it because what it gave me was this really clear view of saying, actually, maybe when we have a vision for a product, maybe it should only serve one person. And maybe the other people which are necessary to achieve what we're trying to achieve, maybe there's steps on the path to fulfilling this one person's needs. And I think that having that really clear focus about who you're trying to serve and what problems you're trying to solve means that, sure, you can experiment around the edges of that, and you can experiment with trying to satisfy that one person, that one kind of target customer. But I think that helps you then say, well, do you know what? Yeah, sure, we've put out this feature, but it isn't really contributing to what we're really trying to achieve here. But if your vision, if your mission is, let's say we've got 6 different customer segments, we're trying to make them all happy, all simultaneously, then I think you're going to end up with a lot of crap in your product, which maybe isn't giving you the return that means it's worthwhile keeping it in.
And because you've mentioned startups before, it got me thinking of the word pivoting. When a startup pivots, effectively, they decide to change their target audience, they decide to change their product to reach product market fit, right? And what they do when they pivot is they have to realize, no, this isn't working, so we're going to do something else. And they have to sunset, or whatever the word is, kill the other parts that they had built before. So actually, startups are probably much better at doing this than big companies, because big companies, LinkedIn, there are thousands of features on LinkedIn. Who is going to notice? So one of the dozens of product managers who work at LinkedIn, then you can just forget about something.
So what are some of the biggest blockers then to deprecating a feature?
Well, so we just talked about one, which is the ego, but the inability of a product manager to recognize that they delivered something which shouldn't have been there in the first place, which isn't working. That's one thing nobody wants to admit. I think that's the first thing. There's also an impression that it is costly to remove a feature, because it is. If you tell your engineers, they're probably going to be upset about it because they spent some time building it. So there's that psychological impact for other people as well, and the time it will take to remove that code. But this is a short-term cost, right? What people find more difficult to estimate is the long-term benefits. All the support tickets you're not going to have, so you have to balance that. Other barriers, I would say, your customers. I work in B2B. I work with enterprise customers. If one of the big banks of the world, or one of these big companies is using that feature, it's going to be really hard. So you need a lot of support from your customer success team. You need to work very closely with this customer. You may have to build something as an alternative. You can't just remove the feature and say, that's it. We decided it's not viable for the business. We're removing it because it may be critical for them. Sometimes your customers use your product in a way that you haven't anticipated. So they are extremely reliant on this. And that's my experience as well. So when I've deprecated features, it has taken me 12 months because I thought it would be done in 6 months or even less. Like, what could go wrong? And every other month we would find out that a customer was like very important because big enterprise customer is using this in a way that first we didn't even think about. Like, why are they using it like this? It's a workaround. Like, you shouldn't even be doing that, but users do it. So you have to work very closely with those customers to provide them with an alternative. And sometimes it is a new feature because it's not just about sunsetting features because they're not adding value. It's also about sunsetting features because they're not relevant anymore. Maybe they're based on old technology. Maybe they are being replaced by something better. And where this conversation in this podcast is relevant is because we talk a lot about AI. Here we go, first time I mention it. And with AI, we're going to bring lots of new features to life, but that means some features are going to become obsolete. I'm a strong believer, for example, that dashboards and data visualization tools as we know them are dead. I think that's a strong word, but nobody wants to.
That's a strong statement, isn't it?
Nobody wants to build a chart. You're not interested in building a chart. I don't want to do a scatter plot. I want to have the answer to my question, right? And generative AI does that. I can ask a question and get the answer, or other types of AI, right? Or create the chart for me. So those times where you are drag and dropping some dimensions to create a chart, and then you change it from a line chart to a bar chart and all of that. I think these days will be gone very soon, and that with a natural language prompt, you'll be asking your question and the answer will come back maybe as a chart to help you, but also an interpretation of that chart, and you've got the answer to your question. That's what you want. So if we implement AI solutions to solve this kind of problem, which is I want to have the answer about how many users are using my software, rather than I want to build a chart that tells me how many users, then we are going to have to maybe sunset those chart building functionalities. So with all innovations comes another side where you have to remove everything that's now obsolete.
So to challenge that a little bit, because it will make an interesting conversation, I reasonably firmly believe that the biggest barrier to humans making the most of AI at the moment is the fact that we're stupid and we don't know what questions to ask. And we will ask very kind of prosaic questions like how many users are using this. We won't begin to ask things about, okay, but what's big? When we look at the journey, actually, when what are the jumping off points from people using that feature to another, and then and actually looking at it more holistically and systemically. And I wonder with some of the reporting that we do get, could that not help people come up with better questions? Because I fear that some people I'm guilty of this, right, with chat GPT, etc., is that I ask very simple questions because I don't know what better questions to ask. I don't understand what it's capable of. So right, if we're going to deprecate some of the charts and some of the stuff that maybe generates some insight and helps people come up with the questions, like how do we help people then come up with the right questions to ask to find those features that they should deprecate?
Yeah, I think that's a very good challenge. And I would say it is something that already exists. So I've been a data analyst. I've been working in data analysis software for a while now. And what I see is that even creating a chart is a skill already. And so building a chart and then interpreting that chart. So that's already a skill. So what you're telling me is now we need a new skill, which is basically prompt design, designing the right prompts to get the same result. But that's just another type of skill. But I think for me, it's just another thing. It is difficult for a user to make sense for maybe less technical users who are not as data literate, even though data literacy is now a skill that's super important for the future, I think. But it's difficult for them, even with dashboards. So where the sentence dashboards out there is a bit strong is, yes, you may need sometimes a starting point. It's easier to have a starting point and then interrogate the data from there rather than starting from nothing.
So it reminds, if I try and loop this back around, when we spoke about, when you spoke about some of the blockers to deprecating features, and the first one you mentioned, and I wrote down ego, and maybe this isn't a question, maybe this is just a thought, but I think that for product people, I think coaching can help, and maybe in that process of coaching, insights are generated. And then I think you have to take those thoughts that you've had, those things you want to prove, and then maybe with using AI, it's a case saying, well, how do I take these things that I've come up with and actually craft some prompts which give me the insights that I need to then go and make a future decision. So I'm wondering if when we're thinking about visualization of AI and we're thinking about like product people coaching and getting over ourselves and understanding what we deprecate, it all comes together into something where actually there's a journey that we can go on when it comes to actually figuring out what we need to deprecate and why. So I think that was more of a thought from the question. I apologize, Magali.
No problem. I could see you had something in your mind.
Yeah, no, I was there. I was curious.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about that. I actually found that it's easy to forget some aspects when you're deprecating a product or a feature, because that's not something that product managers do a lot, even though they should do a lot more of it. It's not something that is talked about in product management courses as well. So you can get a coach, but I also find that sometimes like bouncing ideas at ChatGPT or any other type of generative AI, for example, it really helps. So you can set the context. So here, going back to prompt design. So I'm a product manager. This is my product. It does this and that. Here is the feature that people aren't using, or these are the reasons why I'm thinking of sunsetting it. What do you think, ChatGPT, could be the objections from my customers? And just like bouncing back ideas like this when you don't have a coach, like ChatGPT could be your coach in that case, to just make sure that you have covered all the potential things that people may raise internally, customers may raise, your finance team may raise, and you're prepared to, for that elevator pitch that we were talking about, have all your arguments.
That's a great idea. It does remind me that a very an old friend of mine, he says to ChatGPT, I would like a coaching session in the style of time to think, which is an approach by Nancy Klein, which is a very interesting technique. And he gets ChatGPT to coach him using a specific technique. my statement earlier about what we get from generative AI is limited by what we feel we can ask it. Actually, I think people can be really surprised if what you can feed in and what you can ask it to do for you. So perhaps that's something I might try this afternoon, is ask it to coach me through some product dilemmas and just see what it comes back with. Because I mean, why not?
Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of use cases in the new year, new resolutions. You can definitely do a lot of playing around.
So before we wrap up this, there's two big things that I really want to cover. So first of all is when we started this off with, we were saying how endings fuel future success. If you had to really succinctly say, okay, this is why deprecation fuels future success. Like, what is it? What are those bullet points which really hit home for you as to why and how deprecation of features fuels that future success?
I would say the big thing is it saves time for everyone involved in terms of maintenance and support, which saves costs and then means that you can reinvest all of that into innovation, into building the future and delight your customers. On the other side, your customers are also going to feel the benefits because they're going to have a less cluttered experience, and they're not going to run into features that aren't supported and that aren't fit for purpose. So actually their satisfaction is going to increase with the product. So it's a virtuous circle that you can reinvest all of that and then make things better. It's just about giving you a bit more space actually to do a better product.
So I want to add two. I think these are two different things. If they're the same things that you said, Magali, you can call me out and say, Ben, you're a shit podcast host because you're just repeating what I said. Is that, and I'm going to take two very different angles on this. One, as an ex-developer, I would say that actually taking stuff out, reducing the number of lines of code you have, make it easier to work with your software products, and actually how that software product is architected should lend itself to be able to take stuff out without it causing a huge amount of stress. And actually, when you are deprecating features, and then your engineering teams are actually designing it in such a way that makes it easy, what you end up with is a well-designed piece of software which lends itself to all kinds of adaptability, extensibility, makes it easy to maintain, makes it easy to release stuff, and importantly, easier to take stuff out and run those small tests. Because, I mean, many of us have been in situations where you work with monoliths, where it just isn't possible to take out that one thing or turn that one thing out without having a huge amount of effort and risk being presented to you. So I think the deprecation features is great because I think it orients the engineering organization, engineering teams to actually make a well-architected, well-designed piece of software. But then also on the top of that, I think that process of cleaning out the cupboards, of throwing stuff out that you don't need anymore, or recycling it, because we should be recycling or reusing, but you know what I mean. Like we're getting rid of the stuff that is no longer relevant. I think it helps product people have a stronger focus on what they're trying to achieve. I think it just galvanizes actually the saying, well, actually, we've got this stuff here that's supposed to be serving these people, and it isn't. And at times, maybe we're not even supposed to be serving those people. So let's just have a harder focus on actually the real goal that we've got here. So I think it can really help increase and galvanize that focus on what we're trying to achieve. So I'm a huge fan. Now, the final thing I'm wondering is that we spoke about a number of different blockers to deprecation of features, whether it's the ego, whether it's the cost of deprecation, it was the psychological impact. And when working with kind of B2B enterprise customers, they got features that they are using or misusing and they just can't live without. If you looked at all those together, is there a consistent series of steps or guidance that you would give to people as to how you start and where you end up to guide people through this journey of deprecation of features?
Yeah, initially I thought your question was going to be, is there a theme that you see in all those reasons? And I was thinking, yes, human beings are the blockers.
Yeah. The world would be a better place if it took out humans. Yeah,
exactly.
It would be much better.
If you ask ChatGPT, ChatGPT has no problem, I'm sure, deprecating features.
Or deprecating humans. Maybe that's another episode. So no, humans are the problem. But are there some steps or broad guidance you can give to people? What are some of the steps we can go through?
Yeah, sure. So there's lots of steps. I think the first thing is always, as a product manager, start by why and data. So try and understand why is. So let's assume you have a feature in mind, for example. Why is it not performing? Is it not aligned to your vision? Gather some quantitative and also qualitative data to get the full picture, because that's your business case somehow. That's what you're going to pitch when you say, okay, my decision in my roadmap is that I'm not going to launch anything. I'm going to sunset something. So it starts with why and having this very clear. And there's data you can get yourself as a product manager. We've got access to self-service tools. We can talk to customers, but also talking to your stakeholders. So you mentioned your point of view as a former developer. That's super important. Talking to your customer support team, talking to customer success. That's super important to get their perspective as well. So these are all data points you can use to answer the question, why? Then it's about understanding all the dependencies. So what does it mean if we remove this feature? Or maybe there's another feature that's impacted because it's part of the same workflow. Maybe that means we need to rethink the way we're doing the experience. So there are lots of dependencies, and I'm talking about user experience dependencies or technical dependencies. Maybe your team actually can't do it on their own. They have to rely on the platform team doing something. Because if you're a platform team deprecating a feature, you will want to talk to your teams that have dependencies with you. So it's understanding the broader context about what if we sunset this feature, what's going to happen. And then you can make a decision about what does deprecating mean to you, because it can mean just we remove that feature. It can mean we remove it, but we provide a workaround, or we can be we remove it and we provide a brand new solution that's going to be much better. So there are lots we use, and actually agreeing on the terminology is one of the steps as well. You use internally. Do you say sunset, deprecate, kill? Is there like lots of words in English language and in lots of other languages as well, if your company is international, that you may want to use. And there are lots of ways to do that as well. You don't have to turn it off for everybody at the same time. It's like a launch. You can do phased launches, like canally launch, 10% of your user base first, see how it goes, and then 10% more and all of that. You can do the same thing. So you could take that kind of approach as well. So there's a lot more planning. I see deprecating a feature as a project somehow, a bit like launching a feature. There are steps that need to happen, and you have to decide of an approach and work with your stakeholders. So so one is why. Second is, okay, what are the dependencies and how? And then 3 is just do it and adjust. And your podcast has the name Agile in it, so it will take a lot of agility, because there are always things you didn't think about. This customer is going to come to you and say, I use it, you can't do it, I need like 2 more months, I don't have time. You may have to put some extra resources from a professional services standpoint in B2B, for example, to help those customers migrate to a new version or implement this new workaround that you've given them. So there may be a lot of resources to pull to help customers migrate as well. And at some point you just, that's it, you're done, and that's success. And that's a success that probably should be as celebrated as launching a feature.
I've spent many years working in agile environments, and there was always this idea that how many lines of code that a team writes was a really positive, was a thing you could measure. We want more lines of code, but actually it's the opposite. You want fewer lines of code, and I think it all works together brilliantly. I mean, agile gets a gets a bad rap, understandably. I think there's lots of stuff in the agile community and agile industry which has sent it into a bad place. But ultimately, what the whole idea was being able to adapt quickly based upon what your users and customers want, and getting your people that are creating it working closely with the people that are going to be receiving it, so that you increase the probability that people are making good decisions along the way. And I mean, there's nothing we can't argue that isn't a great thing. And I think what you're saying here is that there is a long and complicated journey at times to take features out, and it means we have to collaborate and we have to work together and we have to find ways to be able to adapt. And we don't know what hurdles we're going to come across along the way, whether it's that customer who's using it in a strange way, or whether we just can't do it technically, or whether we haven't got the budget for it, whether there's a political issue within the organization, or maybe it's just someone's ego. So this is a brilliant soup of different problems and issues, and it's so nice to hear you talk about them, Magali, because I'm a huge fan of this topic, as I said earlier. Now, we are getting towards the end of our time for this episode. I was wondering, is there anything that you wish I had asked you that I hadn't?
I think the question people ask me in general about this topic is, if I do all the planning and I follow all the steps and I talk to all my stakeholders and talk to all my customers and adapt, how will deprecating your product go? Will it go well? And the answer is no, it won't. It won't be easy. It won't be smooth. It's difficult when you take something away from people, from your users. It is painful. It's going to be difficult. It took me 12 months. It's going to take time, but it is worth it. So that's it. I've asked the question and answered it.
Awesome. Look at that. See, it's because I'm such an... I'm going to blow my own trumpet there. But that's a really sneaky, crappy coaching question to ask. When you're learning how to coach, it's your kind of catch-all. And it's like, what question do you wish I had asked you? And then we're like, oh, that's a really good question. So it's not a good question. It's just because I can't think of the next question to ask. Magali, thank you so much for your time on this topic. I've loved it. It's been really, really interesting, and I think really speaks to many of the other episodes we've released, whether it was the episode of Cliff Hazel about quitting, or the episodes with Shane Hasty, actually, that came out recently, where we were talking about the importance of making sure that initial analysis is done well before you even create the features, so that you're not ending up with something which actually was never going to be valuable. I mean, sure, there's testing hypotheses, but sometimes you can find out before it even hits the product as to whether or not it's going to be successful or not, the probability of success. So I think it ties in so well to so many of the conversations that we've had, and you've been the icing on the cake, the cherry on the top. So thank you very much for your time with this.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to talk about this topic. And yes, you're right. It's definitely a big part of product management. And that's part of the job, and that's often forgotten. So it's nice for your listeners too.
So you run a workshop on this topic, or you have run a workshop on this topic in the past. Are you offering them publicly, or is it only an internal thing, or is it only for private clients? Like, if people are really interested and want to say, oh, actually, this would be really cool to go through a workshop on this, like, how can they do that?
Yes. So I ran the workshop in Lisbon as productized, and it was really fun because it was in a room with maybe 30 people, and we were by team, and there was a bit of a team competition. Obviously, I can't do that in most settings, so I ran it for individuals. So you can sign up on my website. There are a set of dates that are available, so you can just join. It's virtual, so it's a different experience, right? But still very practical and interactive. It's not just me talking about deprecation, because that would be boring, and we can take some actual examples. And then if companies are interested, then I can do also private workshops, either in person or remote, and adapt the format to their need, because I think if they start thinking about it, they probably have some examples in mind. So it's very good to be able to tailor content to their perspective.
Magali, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for listening. We've covered some big topics, such as how crap LinkedIn's approach to getting people to test AI is so you can become a top voice in something. We're speaking about the different blockers to deprecating features. We're talking about techniques and ways you can maybe overcome some of those blockers and what some of the pathway is for deprecating features. And we've spoken about the importance of adaptability with all of this and how our products live or die on our ability to adapt. And sometimes that doesn't mean how quickly we get something out and test it. It can be how quickly we get something out, test it, so it's not working, and then take it out and put it in the bin, or perhaps even recycle it if that's even a thing. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. And Magali, thank you for your time. You'll be back for a second episode where we are going to be talking about riding waves of product trends and about a book which you have written. So I really look forward to that conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll see you again soon.